Oregon is one of the most beautiful places in the United States. Old-growth forest so dense the light disappears before noon. Crater Lake so still it looks like a mirror someone forgot to hang. Coastal highways that stretch for miles without another car in sight. People come here to disappear into the scenery, but 10 of them disappeared for a different reason. 10 cases, 10 people. Every single one of them still missing. Pull up a map, lock your doors, let's get into it. June 4th, 2010. It's a Friday morning, and Skyline Elementary School in Northwest Portland is buzzing. It's Science Fair Day, one of those school events where parents show up, kids drag in poster boards and dioramas, and the hallways smell like glue sticks and construction paper. The school sits up in the West Hills above the city, and surrounded by the kind of dense Pacific Northwest forest that makes you forget Portland is just a few miles downhill. It's a normal morning. It's the kind of morning that should not produce a mystery. Kieran Richard Horman is 7 years old. He's in 2nd grade. He's wearing a black t-shirt with CSI on the front because his hobby, his actual hobby at age 7, is forensic science. He's brought in a frog habitat diorama he built himself, featuring red-eyed tree frogs, his favorite animal. His stepmother Terry drove him to school that morning in his father Kaney's truck. She doesn't usually take the truck, but she needed it to bring the project home later. She photographs him next to his diorama at approximately 8:45 in the morning. He's smiling. That photo is the last confirmed image of Kieran Horman. Well, here's where the timeline starts to fracture. According to Terry, she walked Kieran back toward his classroom after touring the science fair and then left the school. But a fellow student reported seeing Kieran near the school's south entrance at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning, which would be after Terry claims she was already gone. That's a detail investigators would return to repeatedly, because what happens in the window between 8:45 and 9 o'clock in the morning is the entire question. Kieran doesn't show up to his first class. His teacher doesn't flag it. The school had been told by someone that Kieran had a doctor's appointment that day, so his empty seat gets an explanation attached to it, and no alarm is raised. That administrative note, whoever made it, bought hours of silence. Kieran's classroom sits empty all day, and nobody calls home. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Kaney Horman leaves work and goes to the bus stop to meet Kieran. The bus arrives. Kieran is not on it. The driver looks confused. Kaney calls the school. The school confirms what they hadn't confirmed to anyone all day. Kieran never attended a single class. He has been missing for at least 6.5 hours before anyone outside the school even knows to look. Terry reports Kieran missing to Portland police at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. This is where it stops being a missing child report and starts being something else. The search that launched over the following days became the largest in Oregon history. More than 1,300 searchers, state police, FBI, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, a National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, volunteers from Oregon, Washington, and California combed a 2-mile radius around Skyline Elementary and out towards Sauvie Island, approximately 6 miles away. A $25,000 reward was posted immediately, later raised to $50,000. By November of 2010, the county had spent an estimated $1.4 million on the investigation. They received 4,257 tips, and they found nothing. But here's what doesn't make sense. Multiple witnesses reportedly saw Terry and Kieran walking out through the front of the school together that morning, toward the truck, toward the main road, after Terry claims she had already left. Those witnesses include people who knew both Terry and Kieran by sight, and their accounts have never been fully explained or officially resolved. And then there's the phone. Cell records showed Terry's phone pinging towers along Highway 30 in northwest Portland after she left the school. A remote, rural stretch of road with no grocery stores, no coffee shops, no reason to be there on a school morning if you're heading back to a house in the suburbs. Terry has said she drove around doing errands that day, including stopping at 2 grocery stores. No confirmed record of those stops has ever been made public. 2 weeks into the investigation, it got worse. The family's landscaper, Rodolfo Sanchez, walked into a police station and told investigators that approximately 5 months before Kyron disappeared, back in January of 2010, Terry had approached him and offered him money to kill Kaney Horman, Kyron's father. Sanchez agreed to wear a wire for investigators and confront Terry. The confrontation happened. No usable evidence came out of it. Terry denied the allegation in her deposition. She has never been officially named as a suspect or person of interest by law enforcement, though a judge and her own attorneys have used that language in court filings. Terry failed 2 separate polygraph examinations regarding Kyron's disappearance. She has maintained her innocence publicly, including in a 2016 appearance on a national television program, where she said she was told from the beginning not to speak publicly and that she had asked multiple times to do so. A grand jury convened. Witnesses were subpoenaed. As of December of 2010, no indictment had been returned. A secret grand jury panel was still hearing evidence as recently as 2017. Nobody has ever been charged. 3 witnesses described seeing a second unidentified person sitting in Terry's truck outside Skyline Elementary on the morning of June 4th. That person has never been identified. The frog habitat diorama, the one Kyron built, the one Terry photographed him with at 8:45 in the morning, was still sitting on the table at 3:30 in the afternoon when Kaney realized his son was missing. Nobody had come back for it. It was still there in the same school hallway. While somewhere outside those walls, Kyron was already gone. It has been 16 years. Kyron Horman has never been found. No remains, no confirmed sightings, no charges. The $50,000 reward remains unclaimed. His mother, Desiree, keeps a space in her backyard she calls Kyron's pad, filled with frog decorations. His room in her Medford home has stayed the same. She said recently, "Kyron still exists. He's still part of our family." Kyron was 7 years old and disappeared in broad daylight from a school full of people on a Friday morning when everything was supposed to be fine. The next case is an entire family, and they vanished in the middle of a forest their grandmother could see from her kitchen window. Richard Cowden was 28 years old. He drove a logging truck for a living, and he was the kind of man who fixed things himself and spent weekends outdoors with his family. His wife Belinda was 22. Their son David had just turned 5. Their daughter Melissa was 5 months old. And their basset hound, Droopy, Mies, went everywhere with them. The camping trip wasn't even planned. That's the first detail that matters. Richard had intended to spend the Labor Day weekend of 1974 hauling gravel to their property in White City, finishing work on their driveway. But the truck he needed broke down. So instead, on August 30th, the Cowdens loaded up their 1956 Ford pickup and drove into the Siskiyou Mountains, to a campsite near Carberry Creek, outside the small community of Copper, Oregon. A place they had been before. A place they knew. Belinda's mother lived less than a mile from the campground. That detail matters too. The family set up camp along the creek in the Rogue River, Siskiyou National Forest. The Siskiyou Mountains in southern Oregon are steep and dense. Old-growth timber, rough dirt roads, The kind of terrain where you can drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. But this campground was familiar, close to family, the kind of place you go to relax for a weekend. Nothing about this trip had any reason to turn into what it became. On the morning of Sunday, September 1st, 1974, Richard Cowden and his 5-year-old son David walked from the campsite to the Copper General Store, about a mile down the road. Richard bought a carton of milk. The two of them turned around and headed back toward camp. That short walk, a father and a little boy, carrying milk, headed back to where the family was waiting, is the last confirmed sighting of anyone in the Cowden family. That evening, Belinda's mother drove the short distance to the campground expecting to have dinner with her daughter's family before they headed home. She found the campsite intact. The camp stove was still assembled. The carton of milk Richard had bought that morning sat on the table, half finished. Belinda's purse was in plain sight. Richard's wallet was there, along with an expensive watch. The keys to their truck were on the picnic table. A plastic dishpan full of cold water sat on the ground. Everything was exactly where it should be. The family was gone, and that's the last confirmed time anyone saw them. Belinda's mother waited. Then she reported the family missing to authorities. Under the protocols of 1974, law enforcement typically waited 24 hours before launching a formal search for missing adults. So the night passed. The campsite sat undisturbed. And the next morning, Droopy turned up alone at the door of the Copper General Store, scratching at the entrance, agitated, looking for the family that had brought him there 3 days earlier and hadn't come back. The search that followed became one of the largest in Oregon history. The Oregon National Guard deployed. State and local police, the United States Forest Service, Explorer Scouts, and hundreds of civilian volunteers fanned out across the surrounding wilderness. Helicopters equipped with infrared photography flew grid patterns over the forest, looking for recently disturbed earth. Search teams covered more than 25 miles of roads and trails in the area surrounding the campsite. Investigators interviewed more than 150 people. A $2,000 reward was posted. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not a single piece of evidence that the Cowden family had gone anywhere at all. After Richard and David turned away from the general store and started walking back toward camp on the morning of September 1st. The official search was suspended on September 7th, 1 week after they went missing. Friends and relatives of the family refused to stop. They spent their weekends and vacation days continuing to search the surrounding hills for months. 200 citizens wrote to then Oregon Senator Mark Hatfield requesting that the FBI be brought in. The petition was denied. The official response stated there was no evidence the Cowdens had been kidnapped or taken across state lines. The case stalled. The mountain kept its silence. Then, 7 months later, it broke. On April 12, 1975, 2 gold prospectors from Forest Grove were hiking through a stretch of heavily wooded hillside near Carberry Creek, approximately 7 miles from the Cowden campsite. They found a decomposing adult male tied to a tree on a steep slope. In a small cave nearby, sealed shut with rocks stacked across the entrance, they found 3 more bodies: an adult female, a young child, and an infant. Dental records confirmed what the families already feared. The bodies were Richard, Belinda, David, and Melissa Cowden. Now this is where the case turns dark in a different way, because of what the autopsies revealed and what they didn't. Belinda Cowden, 22 years old, had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm. 5-year-old David had also been shot with a .22 caliber firearm. 5-month-old Melissa had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head. Richard Cowden, found tied to a tree on that hillside 7 miles from where his family had been camping. His cause of death could not be determined. The decomposition was too advanced. and the manner in which he died has officially remained unknown ever since. Here's the critical detail. The bodies were found 7 miles from the campsite, hidden in a sealed cave and tied to a tree on a steep hillside. Someone moved this family. Someone moved a 22-year-old woman, a 5-year-old boy, and a 5-month-old infant, along with a 28-year-old man. 7 miles into rough wilderness terrain, concealed them deliberately, and was never caught. The law enforcement had a suspect almost immediately. His name was Dwayne Lee Little, 25 years old at the time of the family's disappearance, a resident of Rouge, Oregon, a small community not far from Copper. Little had been paroled from the Oregon State Penitentiary just 3 months before the Cowdens went missing. He had been incarcerated since the age of 16, convicted of the rape and murder of a teenage girl named Orla Faye Phipps in 1964. State police were able to place Little in the Copper area over the Labor Day weekend of 1974, at the approximate time the family disappeared. His girlfriend later told investigators she had seen him in possession of a .22 caliber firearm around Christmas of 1974. And his parole was revoked in January of 1975 when she reported this to police. A miner who operated a cabin in the area signed a guest book entry showing Little and his parents had stopped by on the morning of September 2nd, 1974, the day after the Cowdens were last seen. A family staying at the campground that weekend reported seeing 2 men and a woman in a truck in the area. Police later suspected this may have been Little and his parents, as the vehicle matched their description. An inmate who once shared a cell with Little claimed that Little had confessed to the Cowden murders. Dwayne Lee Little has never been charged with the murders of the Cowden family. Despite what investigators described as voluminous circumstantial evidence, no arrest has ever been made. Little went on to commit further violent crimes after his second parole in 1977, including a brutal assault on a pregnant woman in 1980. The Cowden case remains officially unsolved. The campsite is gone now. The town of Copper, where Richard Cowden and his son walked to buy milk on the last morning anyone saw them alive, was flooded when the Army Corps of Engineers completed the Applegate Dam in 1980. Applegate Lake now covers that stretch of creek and road. The general store, the campground, the short walk between them, all of it is underwater. And somewhere in the hills above that lake, and about 7 miles from where it happened, is a hillside and a cave that still hold answers no one has ever been forced to give. The Cowden family disappeared from a campsite their family could see from a kitchen window. The next case, a 17-year-old girl vanished during a half-mile walk through her own hometown in the middle of the afternoon. And 40 years later, her parents died without ever knowing what happened to her. September 30th, 1983. Warrenton, Oregon. Population under 5,000. A small coastal town at the mouth of the Columbia River. The kind of place where people know their neighbors' cars, where the same families have lived for generations, where a teenager walking down Main Street in the early afternoon is the least alarming thing imaginable. Joan Hall was 17 years old, and everyone called her Joni. She was a senior at Warrenton High School, the youngest of 6 children, and by every account, a serious and grounded kid. Reliable, close to her family, the type who always let her parents know where she was going. She wanted to be a police officer when she graduated. The night before she disappeared, the night of September 29th, 1983, she had been elected the first female president of the Clatsop County Sheriff's Department Explorer Post. She was going to be someone who protected people. She was 17 years old. On the afternoon of September 30th, a classmate named Mike Moore gave Joni a ride from Warrenton High School to the Warrenton Mini Mart on Main Street It was somewhere between 2 and 2:30 in the afternoon. Aunt Joni told Moore she was going to buy a soft drink and then walk the half-mile to Warrenton Grade School, where her aunt, a third-grade teacher, was waiting for her help. A half-mile walk, a Tuesday afternoon, broad daylight in a town where she knew almost everyone. She bought her soda. She walked out of the mini-mart. She never arrived at the school. A witness at a pizzeria near the mini-mart later told investigators he had seen a girl matching Joni's description come out of the store, start walking west along Main Street, and then, almost immediately, stop, turn around, and walk back toward a young man she apparently recognized, someone in his late teens or early 20s. They talked for a few minutes on the sidewalk. Then they crossed the street together. And then they were gone. And that witness account has never been fully resolved. The young man was never conclusively identified. Here's what investigators also had to work with. 3 separate boys told police they had seen Joni Hall later that same afternoon, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in a driveway, inside a car with Mike Moore, the classmate who had given her the ride to the mini-mart. That would have placed her alive more than an hour and a half after she left the store. It would have changed the timeline entirely. But then all 3 boys changed their stories. They said it wasn't Joni. It was another girl, someone else from the school. No explanation was recorded for why they changed their accounts. No documentation exists of what prompted the reversal. The original statements and the recantations are simply both in the record, like sitting next to each other with nothing between them. Now this is where the case turns dark in a different way. The deputy who took those statements, the deputy who wrote the report documenting the 3 boys' change of story, was Gerald Bash. Deputy Bash did not note anywhere in his report that he was the father of Mike Bash, one of the individuals whose name had come up in connection with Joni's disappearance. That omission was not discovered until decades later, when the case records were finally unsealed. There is no official explanation for why it wasn't disclosed. There is no record of anyone addressing it at the time. The Warrenton police chief, who also interviewed witnesses that day, wrote a separate report. His report made no mention of any change or recantation in the boys' statements at all, as though the reversal had simply not happened. Investigators worked the case in the days and weeks that followed. Multiple agencies were involved. Psychics were consulted. Exhaustive searches of the surrounding area, including logging roads and the coastal terrain outside Warrenton, produced nothing. No physical evidence of Joni Hall was ever found. No body, no clothing, no belongings, nothing that explained where she went after she walked out of that mini-mart and into the middle of a Tuesday afternoon in a town where everyone knew her face. The original detectives who worked Joni's case in 1983 have since died, retired, or moved away. The case went cold and stayed cold. Her parents, convinced from the beginning that something terrible had happened to their daughter, spent the rest of their lives without answers. Her father died in July of 1994. Her mother died in September of the same year, 11 years after Joni disappeared, in the same calendar year, within 2 months of each other. 2 of Joni's siblings have since died as well, also without answers. In 2024, a Clatsop County Circuit Court judge agreed to unseal the protective order that had kept case records private since 2018. Hundreds of pages of interview notes, police reports, and investigative documents were released. More than 2,000 people follow a Facebook page dedicated to finding Joni Hall. Amateur investigators have spent years mapping the inconsistencies in the original reports, tracing the contradictions, trying to build a picture from the fragments that law enforcement left behind. But here's what doesn't make sense, and what has never been explained across 40 years of scrutiny. A half mile. That is the entire distance Joni Hall was supposed to travel. A half-mile walk on a public road in a small town on a clear September afternoon, from a convenience store to an elementary school where her aunt was waiting for her. She was last seen at the mini-mart at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. She was never seen again. Her brother Chuck searched logging roads for 2 weeks after she disappeared. He drove every road he could find. He never found a clue. He said recently, "I really would like to find Joni someday. My mom and dad passed away without knowing. I just hope. Because I know somebody knows something still. Somebody in Warrenton knows what happened to Joni Hall. That is what her family has believed for 40 years, and it is what cold case investigators continue to believe today. The town is small. The distances are short. The afternoon was ordinary, and she was going to be a police officer. She was 17 years old, and she vanished on a sidewalk. The next case, an 8-year-old boy disappeared in a snowstorm, and a witness saw a man struggling with a child on a highway nearby and didn't stop because he assumed it was just a father and his son. December 5th, 1998. Pelican Butte, Winema National Forest, Southern Oregon, roughly 30 miles south of Crater Lake, above Upper Klamath Lake. The elevation at the summit is over 9,000 feet, but the Engebretson family wasn't going to the summit. They were going into the lower forest, the dense fir and pine terrain on the mountain slopes, to find a Christmas tree. It was a Saturday afternoon in early December, cold and overcast, with snow already on the ground from earlier in the season. Derek Engebretson was 8 years old. His family called him Bear Boy because he had grown up in the outdoors the way most kids grow up in living rooms. He hunted with his father Robert. He went mushroom picking with his grandfather Bob. He had been to Pelican Butte before on those same mushroom expeditions with his grandfather. He knew this mountain. He was carrying a small hatchet when they left the truck that afternoon, and he was wearing a snowsuit. He was comfortable out here. This was his territory. The three of them, Robert, grandfather Bob, and Derek, spread out through the trees looking for the right Christmas tree. At some point, Derek was with his grandfather and wanted to catch up to his father, who had moved ahead along the trail. His grandfather let him go. Derek walked ahead into the forest, heading toward where his father was working. He never arrived. Robert came back to the meeting point. Bob was there. Derek was not. They called for him. They searched the immediate area. Nothing. Robert drove to a nearby highway to flag down help, and a passing motorist drove to a resort approximately 2 miles away and called 911 at approximately 4:13 in the afternoon. In the hours before the search teams arrived, Robert and Bob made a discovery in the snow near the road. Small footprints, Derek's footprints, looping from the last known location to a clearing near the highway. And in that clearing, pressed into the snow, was a snow angel. A child had lain down in the snow and moved their arms and legs. Derek had been here, at the edge of the road, at some point after he walked away from his grandfather. A snowplow had come through. The tracks leading away from the snow angel had been obliterated. There was no trail to follow. The road was clean, and Derek was gone. Here's the critical detail. A witness came forward later and reported seeing a man struggling with a young boy along a nearby highway that same afternoon. A physical struggle, the kind that would normally demand a second look. The witness hadn't stopped. He assumed it was a father and his son, a domestic disagreement. Asked none of his business. He drove on. By the time he connected what he had seen to the search for Derek Engebretson, the window was closed. A second witness reported an unidentified man driving a two-door Honda in the forest that day, stopping to ask strangers for directions. That man was never identified. The search that launched that evening and continued over the following weeks was massive in scope and devastating in its failure. A Civil Air Patrol plane flew the area. An Air Force Reserve helicopter swept the terrain. Search dogs were deployed and found nothing. Not a scent trail, not a footprint beyond what had already been discovered near the road. A crude shelter made of fir boughs was found beneath some fallen logs in the forest, the kind of structure a resourceful child might build. But the search dogs could not pick up Derek's scent there either. Investigators could not confirm whether Derek had built it or whether it had been there before. Klamath County Search and Rescue officially suspended the search on December 13th, 8 days after Derek disappeared. Robert and Bob Ingebretson, both of whom passed polygraph examinations, refused to leave. The family camped on the mountain in a donated camper van for 2 more weeks, continuing to search on their own. On December 18th, sub-zero temperatures made it unsafe for anyone to remain in the area. They were forced to come down. Over the following 2 years, the more than 10,000 hours of ground search time were logged by volunteers and family members. Robert drove from his graveyard shift directly to the mountain every weekend for 2 years straight, meeting Lori, Derek's mother. They kept a map marking every area they had covered. Derek's body was never found. Not a piece of clothing, not a bone, nothing. The investigation into Derek Engebretson's disappearance did not die with the search. It shifted into a quieter, more unsettling register that stretched across years and never fully resolved. In September of 1999, graffiti was discovered in a bathroom at the Sajahan Rest Area, approximately 300 miles south of Portland. Law enforcement identified the writing as referential to Derek's disappearance. The content of the graffiti was never made public, as Derek's mother, Lori, drove to see it when she was notified. She said, "I think it's just a big, sick joke. If somebody would have had Derek, if they put this on the wall, they were wanting to be caught. If they were wanting to be caught, why didn't they leave something of Derek's there?" The FBI examined the graffiti and ruled it a hoax. Whether that ruling brought the family any comfort is unclear. In late 2001, a handwritten letter arrived at the Engebretson family home. It said, "I know who took your son." No follow-up communication was ever received. The letter produced no actionable leads. In 2000, a bone was discovered on Pelican Butte and brought to investigators. The family waited several days for identification. It was from a deer. And then, in 2008, a name entered the case file. Sir Frank James Milligan, a state youth authority worker who in July of 2000 had approached a 10-year-old boy at a park in Dallas, Oregon, offered him money to mow his lawn, bound the boy's hands with duct tape, driven him to a remote location north of Salem, and sexually assaulted him. Milligan was convicted and sentenced to prison for that crime, but investigators looking further into his background discovered something that connected him, at least circumstantially, to a much older case. Milligan had confessed to the abduction and murder of Jeremy Bright, a 9-year-old boy who disappeared from Springfield, Oregon in 1986. And Milligan's movements and criminal history placed him in the general region during the period when Derek disappeared. He has never been charged in Derek Engebretson's case, and no physical evidence has ever linked him to Pelican Butte on December 5, 1998. But his name is in the file, and it has never been removed. Here's what doesn't make sense, and what Derek's family has refused to accept as an explanation: the theory that he simply wandered off and died of exposure. Derek Engebretson was 8 years old, but he was not an ordinary 8-year-old in the wilderness. He had grown up on these mountains. He had been to Pelican Butte specifically, on multiple occasions. He was wearing a snowsuit. He had a hatchet. His mother, Lori, said years later that he had been in situations far more challenging than a December afternoon on a familiar slope, and that the idea he would have succumbed to the elements without leaving a single trace. No remains, no clothing, no gear, and nothing scattered by animals, was something she could not reconcile with what she knew about her son. And there were 10,000 hours of ground searches, 2 years of weekends, volunteers who covered every accessible part of that mountain. Nothing. In cases where a child dies of exposure in the wilderness, remains are typically found. Partial remains, scattered clothing, something. The forest does not make people disappear without leaving a single molecule behind. The snow angel near the road is the image that stays. A child pressed into the snow at the edge of a highway, arms moving, legs moving, alive, oriented enough to find the road, and then gone. The tracks leading away obliterated by a snowplow that came through at exactly the wrong moment. Whatever happened to Derek Engebretson happened in the gap between that snow angel and the next confirmed moment in the world, and that gap has never been closed. Derek was 8 years old in a forest he knew. The next person disappeared between a small town and a restaurant parking lot 55 miles away. And no one has ever been able to explain how she got there or what happened in the weeks between. October 30th, 2004. Hood River, Oregon. A small city of under 8,000 people set between the Columbia River and the base of Mount Hood, one of the most geographically striking communities in the state. A place where orchards and windsurfing and the weight of the gorge all exist at the same address. Kimberly Forbes lived here. She was 48 years old, a bank teller at Columbia Riverbank in the Dalles, about 20 miles east. She was described by everyone who knew her as reliable, punctual, the kind of person who called when she was running 5 minutes late. On October 30th, a Saturday, Kimberly was last seen at her residence on Jeanette Road in Hood River. She had plans for the following morning, Sunday, October 31st. She was going to meet a friend for breakfast and then drive into Portland to go shopping. It was a casual plan, the kind made between people who see each other regularly. Her friend expected her. She never showed up for breakfast. No call, no message, nothing. Her co-workers at the bank expected her on Monday, November 1st. She didn't come in. She was not the type of person to miss work without notice. She was not believed to be in any kind of mental health crisis. There was nothing in her life, as far as anyone who knew her could determine. That explained why she would simply stop showing up. Here's where the silence deepens. From the moment Kimberly Forbes was last seen on October 30th, there was no activity on her bank accounts. No credit card transactions, no phone calls, nothing. She stepped out of her life on a Saturday and left no digital trail behind her whatsoever. Which, in the context of a woman who had a steady job, a routine, and no known reason to disappear, is itself a kind of answer, even if it doesn't tell you what the question is. 19 days passed. On November 19th, 2004, a tow truck driver named Danny Closser got a call about an abandoned vehicle in the parking lot of Don Pedro's Mexican food restaurant at the 18,800 block of Southeast Stark Street in Gresham, Oregon. Gresham is a suburb on the eastern edge of Portland. It is 55 miles from Hood River. Closser arrived and found a burgundy Ford Explorer sitting in the lot. He made the call. It was Kimberly Forbes' vehicle. Investigators examined the car. They found no leads, no forensic evidence pointing to what had happened or to whom. The Hood River County Sheriff's Office later determined that the Explorer had likely been in that parking lot since at least November 5th, meaning it had been sitting there for approximately 2 weeks before anyone flagged it, in a busy commercial parking lot on a well-traveled suburban street. 2 weeks. The rain and foot traffic and daily activity of a suburban parking lot working against whatever evidence might have been left behind. But here's what doesn't make sense. Kimberly Forbes did not normally travel to Portland alone. Her friends told investigators that she preferred to make the trip with company. She found the city more comfortable with someone along. On this particular Sunday, all of her friends happened to be unavailable. She had planned to go alone as a one-time exception. And somehow, on the day of that exception, her car ended up abandoned 55 miles from her home in a specific restaurant parking lot, while she vanished without a trace and without accessing a single dollar of her own money. That car did not drive itself to Gresham. Either Kimberly drove it there, or someone else did. If she drove it, something happened to her at or near that parking lot, and no one saw it. If someone else drove it, something happened to her before she ever reached Portland, and the car was moved to create distance from the original location. Neither scenario has ever been confirmed. No crime scene has ever been identified. No suspect has ever been named. The Hood River County Sheriff's Office has worked the case for over 20 years. Crime Stoppers of Oregon has offered a reward. The case was reopened in 2018. As of today, there are no public leads, no identified suspects, and no explanation for where Kimberly Forbes went after she left her house on Jeanette Road on a Saturday morning in October of 2004. A tow truck driver responded to an abandoned vehicle call and found the closest thing to Kimberly Forbes that anyone has ever found since. A burgundy Explorer in a parking lot 20 miles from where she was supposed to be shopping, with the engine cold and the answers nowhere inside. Kimberly Forbes vanished on a highway corridor. The next one, a 27-year-old man, walked away from a campfire at 4:30 in the morning, and the people who were with him couldn't seem to get their stories straight. August 3rd, 2020. Michael Bryson is 27 years old, and he stops by his parents' house in Harrisburg, Oregon, a small farming community in the Willamette Valley, to say hello before heading out. He tells his parents, Parrish and Tina, that he's riding up with a friend to a week-long birthday camping trip at Hobo Camp Campground near Darina, out in the Umpqua National Forest. He seems fine. He's been doing better lately. He'd had a rough stretch with drugs in the years before, but he was turning things around. He told his parents recently that he was thinking about studying to become an electrician. He has a passion for music, always has. He's been invited to DJ sets at parties and raves across Oregon for years. This trip is that world, a week in the woods with music and people he knows. Parrish and Tina say goodbye. They watch him leave. That is the last time they see their son standing in front of them. Hobo Camp Campground sits off Bryce Creek Road in a remote stretch of Lane County forest, roughly 25 miles from the nearest town of Cottage Grove. One that is described as primitive. Roadside pullouts, creek access, towering Douglas fir pressing in from every direction. There is no cell service. On the nights of August 3rd and 4th, between 40 and 60 people gathered there for what Michael's parents later described as a rave. Music, drinking, drugs, a large group spread across the campground and the surrounding forest in the dark. Michael performed a DJ set at some point during the party. He was seen on stage. He was seen afterward. By most accounts, he was having a good time. Then, at approximately 4:30 in the morning on Wednesday, August 5th, something happened on a party bus parked at the campground. Witnesses say Michael got upset. The specific reason has never been publicly confirmed, and walked off the bus. He walked away from the campfire light, and away from the music, away from the group, into the darkness of the Umpqua forest at 4:30 in the morning. Nobody followed him. Nobody went after him to check. Michael Bryson left his camping gear behind. His phone was powered off. His bank account was never accessed again. His parents were not notified until 5 o'clock that same afternoon, more than 12 hours after Michael walked away. Tina Bryson said later that the moment she stepped out of her car at the campground, she knew something was wrong. Not because of the forest or the terrain, because of the people. "I knew Michael was gone," she said. People weren't looking for Michael. They were sitting around, drinking, eating, laughing. Nobody was out searching for him. So I felt in my gut something had happened. Parrish Bryson reached the same conclusion within hours, and for a different reason. The stories he was getting from the partygoers didn't line up. Different people gave different accounts of what had happened, what Michael had been upset about, who had seen him last, and when. The inconsistencies weren't subtle. "The stories given by some of the people at the party are inconsistent," Parrish said publicly. "And most of those people left the day Michael went missing and continued to hold raves and parties. That detail is worth sitting with." Michael Bryson walked into the forest at 4:30 in the morning and disappeared. And the majority of the people who had been with him packed up and left the campground that same day. They did not stay to search. They did not wait for law enforcement to finish interviewing them. They left and they went to another party, and the search that launched over the following days was significant. Hundreds of volunteers responded. Horses, drones, and Lane County search and rescue teams covered miles of the surrounding forest and the Bryce Creek corridor. Parrish and Tina Bryson stayed at the campground for 19 days, refusing to leave, following every tip that came in. Lane County Sheriff's Office assigned a detective full-time to the case. The search covered terrain on foot, from the air, and on horseback. Michael Bryson was not found. Not a trace of him anywhere in the forest surrounding Hobo Camp. And then, 4 months later, something turned up. On December 11th, 2020, a tip came in about items spotted along Bryce Creek Road, roughly a mile west of the campground, between Cedar Creek and Lund Park Campground. The Lane County Sheriff's Office and search and rescue teams responded. They found multiple items of clothing in the area, items that matched what Michael had been wearing the night he disappeared. The clothing was found in a location visible from the road, a location that had been searched multiple times in the weeks after Michael went missing. Parrish Bryson looked at where the items were found, looked at how many times that stretch of road had been walked and driven, and said, "I'm 99.9% sure those items were planted. My gut tells me they were probably placed there because I know the intensity of some of the individuals that went through there. It's really hard for me to believe they were there the whole time." Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed or denied Parrish's assessment, and the Lane County Sheriff's Office declined to confirm whether drugs were present at the party. When asked directly whether they suspected foul play, investigators said they were not ruling it out. The case has remained in an active but static state. A detective assigned, leads worked as they come in. No major developments. The Facebook group Let's Find Michael Bryson has more than 24,000 members. The Michael Bryson Foundation was established by his parents to raise awareness for missing persons cases and to address mental health and addiction. A $10,000 reward has been posted for information leading to Michael's whereabouts. Here's the thing about this case that makes it different from a wilderness disappearance. Michael Bryson did not vanish on a hiking trail or a remote mountain. He vanished at a party, surrounded by 40 to 60 people who knew him or knew of him, in a campground with a road running past it. Someone at that campground knows what happened after he walked off that bus. Someone knows what he was upset about. Someone knows which direction he went and whether he went alone. His mother said it plainly. There's nothing in me that says Michael would have just wandered nonchalantly out of that campground. He would never just leave. Even in his toughest times, he always contacted us. The idea that he would just disappear is unheard of. Michael Bryson has been missing since August 5th, 2020. He would be 31 years old today. His camping gear is still the last physical evidence anyone has of where he was. His phone has never transmitted a signal. His bank account has never moved, and the people who were with him that night went home and kept dancing. Michael Bryson walked into the dark at 4:30 in the morning. The next case, an 8-year-old boy ran over a small hill at Crater Lake in broad daylight and was never seen again. Not a footprint, not a scent trail, not a single trace in one of the most visited national parks in the American West. Crater Lake National Park sits in the Cascade Mountains of south-central Oregon, built around the caldera of a collapsed volcano called Mount Mazama. The lake inside that caldera is the deepest in the United States, 1,943 feet at its deepest point. The water is so blue, it looks artificially colored. The rim sits at over 6,000 feet of elevation, ringed with volcanic rock and dense conifer forest. Every summer, hundreds of thousands of visitors come here to stand at the edge and look down. The Boyolka family was among them in August of 2006. Samuel Boyolka was 8 years old. He had mild autism. He was afraid of loud noises and bright lights, sensitivities that would become devastatingly relevant to the search that was about to begin. His family was visiting the park, doing what families do at Crater Lake. Walking the rim trails, taking in the views, being together on a summer day in one of the most spectacular places in Oregon. Near the Cleetwood Cove Trail area on the north rim, the only trail in the park that descends all the way to the water's surface. Samuel's father was with him when Sammy darted away. Not slowly, not gradually. He ran. He went over a small hill, out of his father's line of sight. And his father went after him immediately. Within seconds, the gap between them was measured in steps. Sammy was gone. His father crested the hill. The terrain opened into the volcanic forest and rocky slopes of the caldera rim. There was no sign of Sammy anywhere. No movement, no sound, no small figure in the trees. The National Park Service was alerted. The search began within minutes of his disappearance. And here is where the case became not just a tragedy, but something that search and rescue professionals still struggle to explain. The dogs couldn't find him. Trained search and rescue canines brought in to follow Sammy's scent trail from the last point where he was seen. They found nothing. No scent, no trail leading into the forest, no trail leading toward the lake, no trail leading anywhere. The dogs simply had nothing to follow. And the search teams could not use their standard tools for calling a lost child back. Air horns, whistles, loudspeakers, the methods that work for most missing children in wilderness settings. Sammy's autism meant that loud, sudden noises were among the things most likely to cause him to run further, hide deeper, press himself into whatever small space he could find and stay there. Every tool designed to bring a lost child toward rescuers was a tool that might drive Sammy further away. The search ran for multiple days. National Park Service rangers, Klamath County Sheriff's Office, volunteer teams, air support, ground teams working every trail and slope on the north rim. The lake below, 1,943 feet deep, its lower reaches never fully explored by any survey. Sammy Boyolka was not found. No remains. No clothing. Nothing. The silence around Sammy Boyolka's disappearance has a particular quality to it. because of what it shares with another case that happened just 30 miles away, 8 years earlier. Derek Engebretson, 8 years old, Southern Oregon, near Crater Lake, 1998. Vanished in a forest his family knew well. Search dogs deployed, unable to pick up a scent. No remains ever found despite years of searching. A witness who saw something on a nearby road and didn't fully process what it meant until it was too late. Samuel Boelke, 8 years old, Crater Lake National Park, 2006. Vanished on a well-traveled trail in a heavily visited national park. Search dogs deployed, unable to pick up a scent. No remains ever found. The lake below, unmapped at its deepest points, on holding whatever it holds. 2 8-year-old boys. The same cluster of mountains, 8 years apart. The same failure of the dogs. The same absolute absence of physical evidence. Investigators and researchers who have studied both cases have noted the parallel without being able to explain it. It does not constitute proof of anything, but it is the kind of coincidence that sits in the back of your mind and does not leave quietly. Here's the critical detail about Crater Lake that matters for understanding how a child could vanish so completely from such a well-trafficked place. The Cleetwood Cove Trail is the only access point to the lake's surface in the entire park. It is steep and rocky, descending nearly 700 feet in just over a mile. The terrain on either side of the trail drops away sharply into volcanic rock formations, no crevices, and dense subalpine forest. The lake itself is so deep that large portions of the bottom have never been surveyed with any precision. If a child went into that water, in the wrong location, in the wrong current, the lake could keep them indefinitely, and researchers have noted as much. But no one saw Sammy near the water. No one saw him go over the rim. There were people on the trail that day. It was August, the height of tourist season at one of Oregon's most visited parks. And still, in a matter of seconds, an 8-year-old boy disappeared from a trail surrounded by other people and was never seen again. Samuel Boelke's case remains open as a National Park Service cold case file. His family has never received an answer. The park has never yielded his remains. The lake has kept its depth, and whatever is at the bottom of it stays there. Sammy Boelke was 8 years old. The next case is different in almost every external detail. Not a forest, not a mountain, not a national park. It is a convenience store on a busy highway in a mid-sized city on a Sunday night in January, with a witness standing close enough to describe what the suspect was wearing. And Becky Reed has never been found either. January 27th, 1997. Eugene, Oregon. Super Bowl Sunday. The game had ended hours earlier, and by 1 o'clock in the morning, the commercial strip along Highway 99 North was quiet. A few cars moving, the kind of thin late-night traffic that exists in every American city after midnight. The grocery cart convenience store sat at 1510 Highway 99 North, on a standalone building on the main northbound artery through Eugene, the kind of store that stays open late and draws a certain late-night clientele. Shift workers, people heading home from bars, people who need cigarettes or milk or something to get them through to morning. Rebecca Reed was 37 years old. Everyone who knew her called her Becky. She was the store manager, not just a clerk, the manager, responsible for closing the store that night, handling the cash deposit, locking up. She was married to a man named Deerold. They had a 13-year-old son together. By every account given by people who knew her, Becky was warm, outgoing, completely devoted to her family. Her sister Chris Yoder described her as an awesome mom who felt like everything in her life was complete. Her marriage was good, she was happy, and she had her son. She was closing the store. It was a routine she had done many times. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, a customer was outside the store collecting empty beer bottles. The kind of task that brings someone to the edge of a parking lot at an odd hour and gives them a clear line of sight to what is happening near the entrance. That customer watched a man walk into the grocery cart, and within minutes watched that same man forcibly lead Becky Reed out of the store. Not walking with her, leading her, forcing her out of her own store, across the parking lot, and into the passenger side of a waiting pickup truck. The customer called 911 immediately. Patrol units responded within minutes. The store was empty. The register was unattended. Becky was gone. The witness gave investigators a description of the suspect and the vehicle that was specific enough to generate a composite sketch and a public alert. The suspect was a white male, late 20s to mid-30s, approximately 5 feet 9, medium build, shoulder-length brown hair, a mustache with scruffy facial hair, wearing a dark baseball cap. His truck was an early 1970s to early 1980s compact or mid-size pickup, white or light-colored, with a horizontal stripe approximately 8 inches wide running along the driver's side, dark in color, possibly blue. White canopy over the bed, bench seat, non-extended cab, Oregon license plates. That description went out immediately. It was specific. It was the kind of description that should have broken a case. 800 leads came in within days. The investigators tracked 1,500 leads in the first year alone. America's Most Wanted ran a profile on Becky's disappearance. The FBI was brought in alongside Eugene Police Department. The composite sketch circulated regionally and nationally. Every single lead went nowhere. Now this is where the case takes a turn that investigators found both promising and ultimately frustrating. Approximately 1 month after Becky Reed was taken from the grocery cart on Highway 99, a man attempted to abduct another woman from a different grocery cart store in Eugene, also at knife point. That woman fought back. She escaped. The man was arrested. His name was John Irva Dunn. He was convicted of the attempted abduction. Investigators immediately worked to connect Dunn to Becky's case. The similarities were striking. Same store chain, on same method, same city, within a month of each other. But they could not make the connection. They could not place Dunn at the Highway 99 store on the night of January 27th. He was never formally named as a suspect in Becky's disappearance, and the investigation of that angle eventually stalled. Here's what doesn't make sense, and what has haunted this case for nearly 30 years. A witness was present in real time. He called 911 while it was happening. He gave a description specific enough to sketch a suspect and identify a vehicle. Eugene is not a small town. It is a university city, a regional hub, with the traffic and the coverage that comes with that. Highway 99 is not a remote road. And still, a man put a woman in a truck in front of a witness and drove away into the night, and he has never been identified. Becky's sister Chris sat with a photo album in 2017 on the 20th anniversary of Becky's disappearance and said, "Somewhere in that police department's basement is a box with your sister's name on it, and nobody is doing anything about it." Eugene police told a local television station at the time that no one could speak on the case due to prosecution deadlines on a separate homicide case. The tip line is still active. The National Missing and Unidentified Person System lists her as missing person number 15,522. The Charlie Project maintains her file. The DOE network carries her entry. Becky's husband, Dearald, gave an interview in 1997 and said, "Our son told me the other night, I sure miss Mom's voice." That son was 13 years old when his mother was taken from a convenience store at 1 in the morning on Super Bowl Sunday. He is in his 40s now, has never gotten an answer. The truck with the horizontal stripe has never been found. The man with the shoulder-length brown hair has never been identified. And Becky Reed has never come home. Becky Reed was taken in front of a witness with a description and a sketch, and she was never found. The next case, a sheriff's deputy spoke to a teenage girl on a coastal highway at 1 a.m, offered her a ride home, and drove away. Minutes later, she was gone, and her skull turned up 10 years later in the back of an abandoned car, hidden under a piece of carpet deep in the woods outside Newport. March 9th, 1984. Newport, Oregon. A small fishing and tourism community on the central Oregon coast. Lincoln County, population under 10,000. The kind of coastal town where the ocean is always audible if you stop and listen. Where Highway 101 runs north to south along the water and Highway 20 branches east toward the mountains and the interior of the state. Kelly Lynn Disney was 17 years old. She was a junior at Newport High School, the second oldest of 4 children. Her younger sister Angela, just 13 at the time. Kelly worked at a pizza parlor in town and was living in an apartment with her boyfriend, Robert Ellis. Her parents and siblings lived in Siletz, about 15 miles east, close enough to visit regularly. Far enough that Kelly was building something like an independent life for herself at 17. On the night of March 8th into the early hours of March 9th, Kelly and Ellis had a verbal argument at their apartment on Herbert Street. The details of the argument have never been fully made public. What is known is that Kelly left the apartment angry, sometime around 12:30 in the morning on March 9th. Ellis went after her, found her walking along Highway 20, and could not convince her to get back in the car. She refused. He drove away. 2 men on their way to night shift jobs came along Highway 20 and saw Kelly walking east. They offered her a ride. She declined. They continued on to work. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, a Lincoln County Sheriff's deputy encountered Kelly Disney walking east on Highway 20 near Southeast Moore Drive, at the edge of Newport heading toward the inland route. When the deputy stopped, he spoke to her. He offered her help, a ride, assistance, whatever she needed. Kelly told him she was heading to a friend's house nearby, that she was fine, that she didn't need anything. The deputy accepted her answer. He got back in his car and drove away. He watched her in his rearview mirror, walking east along the highway in the dark, headed toward a friend's house she said was just a short distance ahead. She never got there. She was never seen alive again. Investigators working Kelly Disney's case in the days and weeks after her disappearance initially treated it as a runaway situation. She was 17. She had left after an argument with her boyfriend. She had refused multiple offers of help the night she went missing. To the people handling the initial report, Abbasi carried the shape of a teenager who had chosen to leave. That framing cost the investigation time it could not afford to lose. Critical early days passed without the full weight of a missing persons investigation behind them. By the time the case was being treated as something more serious, the trail was cold. Newport police organized searches in the surrounding area. Friends and family looked. Nothing turned up. No confirmed sightings, no physical evidence, no indication of where Kelly had gone after the deputy's taillights disappeared down Highway 20, and she was left standing on the roadside alone. Here's the critical detail that investigators would piece together only in retrospect. There was a window. Between the moment the deputy drove away at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning and the next confirmed data point in Kelly's story, investigators now believe there was a gap of approximately 15 to 20 minutes. In that window, Kelly Disney either got into a vehicle willingly, perhaps flagged down a ride she thought was safe, or she was taken. That 15 to 20 minute gap is where everything happened. and it has never been filled. Kelly's family reported her missing the following day, March 10th, after she failed to come home and failed to show up for her shift at the pizza parlor. Her boyfriend was cleared relatively early in the investigation. The case was worked through 1984 and into 1985, and then it quietly went cold. Newport was a small town. The community remembered, but the file sat. 10 years passed. In July of 1994, two men were out near Big Creek Reservoir, northeast of Newport, off the gravel roads that branch away from Highway 101 into the wooded hills above the coast. They found an abandoned car in the trees. Inside the car, underneath a carpet remnant on the floor, they found a human skull. What happened next is one of the stranger details in an already strange case. One of the men took the skull. He brought it home. He washed it with dish soap under a faucet, apparently uncertain what to do with what he had found and acting on some instinct to clean it before turning it over. He then spent several days attempting to surrender the skull to authorities, approaching Oregon State Police, then the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, then Newport Police, and before someone finally accepted it and the object entered the official chain of evidence. Dental records identified the skull as Kelly Lynn Disney. Her death was ruled a homicide. Investigators noted specifically that the skull appeared to have been recently placed at that location, not left there 10 years earlier, not fallen or scattered by wildlife, but placed. Set down deliberately, under a carpet, in an abandoned car, in the woods outside Newport. Someone had put it there. Someone who either had it in their possession for some portion of the 10 years since Kelly disappeared, or someone who had just acquired it and was choosing that moment to dispose of it. The rest of Kelly Disney's body has never been found. The case was reopened. Investigators pursued new leads through the mid-1990s and into 2000. It stalled again. Then, in 2009, the Lincoln County District Attorney's Office resurrected its cold case unit, and two volunteer investigators, Linda Snow, a retired legal assistant, and Trish Miller, a retired sheriff's detective, took the Kelly Disney case as their primary focus. They have been working it ever since. The numbers they have accumulated over 16 years are staggering for a county of Lincoln's size. More than 1,000 people interviewed, hundreds of tips processed, evidence re-examined with technologies that did not exist in 1984. In 2023, the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit began working alongside the local cold case team, bringing federal profiling resources to a 40-year-old coastal Oregon homicide. In October of 2025, an anonymous donor stepped forward and offered a $50,000 reward specifically for information leading to the recovery of Kelly's remains and the conviction of her killer. And in 2025, something else happened. Robert Ellis, Kelly's former boyfriend, the last person confirmed to have spoken with her before she walked away into the night, finally agreed to speak with cold case investigators. He had refused to engage with Linda Snow for 16 years. Whatever created that wall, it held for a decade and a half. And then it didn't. Ellis provided investigators with new information about the night Kelly disappeared. The specific content of that information has not been made public. Here's what doesn't make sense across 40 years of this case. Or rather, here's what makes a particular kind of terrible sense when you sit with it long enough. The skull was placed. It was not scattered. It was not the result of a body decomposing in place over a decade. Someone handled that skull with enough deliberateness to position it inside a vehicle, undercover, miles from the highway where Kelly was last seen. That level of concealment suggests someone who was still thinking about Kelly Disney 10 years after she disappeared. Someone who had reasons to keep certain things hidden and reasons, at some point, to stop hiding them. Or at least to move them somewhere new. The Lincoln County District Attorney's Office has said publicly that they believe members of the Newport community have information about what happened to Kelly. The town is not large. When the people who were teenagers in Newport in 1984 are in their 50s and 60s now. Some of them are still there. Cold case investigator Linda Snow has said, "I believe that $50,000 is enough to get somebody who's been keeping quiet on it to come forward." Kelly's sister, Angela Dodds, lives in Prineville today. She drives to the coast sometimes, to the intersection of Highway 20 and Southeast Moore Drive, to stand where her sister was last seen. She said, "Your sister is supposed to be your best friend when you get older. I never had that." Kelly was 17. Angela was 13. That was 41 years ago, and Kelly is still out there somewhere in the woods above Newport, waiting for someone to finally say what they know. A sheriff's deputy drove away from a girl on a coastal highway at 1 in the morning, and that was the last confirmed moment of her life. The last case, a 14-year-old boy walked into the Sky Lakes wilderness in the summer of 1978, told his brother he was going fishing, and was never seen or heard from again. Not a footprint in the riverbank, not a piece of clothing snagged in the current. Nothing downstream, nothing in the forest, nothing anywhere. And the authorities who closed the search suggested, with no evidence whatsoever, that he had probably just hitchhiked home. June 22, 1978. Sky Lakes Wilderness, Jackson County, Oregon. 12 miles east of the small community of Prospect, outside Butte Falls, deep in the Rogue River, Siskiyou National Forest. The middle fork of the Rogue River runs cold and fast through this terrain. Old-growth forest pressing in on both banks, the water moving over volcanic rock through a canyon with no roads in. To reach this area, you come in on foot, or you don't come in at all. The nearest town is 12 miles away. The wilderness designation means it stays that way. Edward Chester Nye was 14 years old, from Aloha, Oregon, a suburb west of Portland. About as far from this kind of terrain as you can get in the state while still being in the state. He was here with his church youth group, approximately 20 teenagers and adult leaders, on a summer camping trip. Edward was the kind of kid who had a hatchet with him on a camping trip, who wore brown jeans and a yellow shirt and tennis shoes into the wilderness like it was a normal afternoon. By the accounts available, he was a typical active teenage boy, the kind who goes off to fish by himself because waiting around with a group is less interesting than following a river downstream to find a better hole. He told his brother he was going fishing. He said he would be back. He walked toward the sound of the river, downstream, away from the campsite, into the forest. His brother watched him go. Edward Nye never came back. The group searched the immediate campsite and the riverbank. Nothing. Jackson County Search and Rescue was called in. Divers entered the streams and lakes in the surrounding wilderness. Volunteer teams swept the forest. A week-long organized search covered as much of the terrain as was accessible on foot. The Rogue River, with its defined channel and its well-traveled banks, was examined for any evidence that a 14-year-old boy had entered the water. No gear, no clothing, no remains, nothing in the water, nothing on the banks, nothing in the forest between the campsite and wherever Edward went. After 1 week, the county search coordinator made a public statement. He said that investigators believed Edward was no longer in the area. He said they were hoping Edward had hitchhiked home, a 14-year-old boy, in federally designated wilderness, 12 miles from the nearest town, no roads in, and the official conclusion, after 7 days, was that he had probably hitchhiked out. Edward Nye did not hitchhike home. He was never seen again. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children took Edward Chester Nye's case and has maintained it ever since. New age progression photographs have been released and updated over the decades, showing what Edward might look like at 20, at 30, at 40, at 60. He would be in his early 60s today, if he is alive. The Jackson County Cold Case team carries his case as number 78-5188. Their tip line is still active. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System maintains his entry. The Charlie Project keeps his file current. In January of 2026, a television station ran a segment on Edward's disappearance, nearly 48 years after he walked away from that campsite with a hatchet and a fishing plan and never came back. No suspect has ever been developed in Edward Nye's case. Investigators settled on accidental drowning or exposure as the most likely explanation, and with no physical evidence supporting either conclusion. The river produced nothing. The forest produced nothing. The wilderness that swallowed him has never given anything back. Here's what doesn't make sense. The Rogue River is not a mystery. It is a defined waterway with a channel, with banks, with downstream sections that have been fished and hiked and rafted by people for generations. When a body enters a river of that size in that terrain, it does not simply cease to exist, remain surface. Clothing snags on rocks or root systems. Something washes up somewhere, eventually. The divers who searched the streams and lakes in the immediate area found nothing. The searchers who walked the banks downstream found nothing. Over the years since 1978, no one has ever reported finding anything along the Rogue River corridor that could be connected to Edward Nye. The forest is similarly bounded. The Sky Lakes wilderness has trails, has access points, has people moving through it across every hunting and fishing season. For 46 years, nothing connected to Edward has ever been found. And then there is the geography. This is the same mountain range, the Rogue River Siskiyou corridor of southern Oregon, where the Cowden family was murdered just 4 years earlier, in 1974. A family of 4 vanished from a campsite along Carberry Creek and was found 7 miles away, hidden in a sealed cave and tied to a tree on a steep hillside. Edward Nye disappeared from a church youth group camping trip along the middle fork of the Rogue River in 1978. Same range, same general terrain, same pattern of a person going into the wilderness and the wilderness keeping them. That parallel does not constitute evidence of anything. But it is the kind of detail that sits in the record and refuses to be explained away by coincidence alone. Edward's brother watched him walk toward the sound of the river. That image, a 14-year-old boy moving through the trees with a hatchet on a summer afternoon, following the sound of moving water, getting smaller as the distance grew, is the last confirmed frame of his existence. And then the trees closed around him, and the river kept moving, and Edward Chester Nye was gone. He has been missing for 46 years. The search closed after 1 week. The answers have never come. And somewhere in the Sky Lakes wilderness, or in the river that runs through it, or somewhere between that campsite and whatever happened next, Edward is still there. 10 cases, and now you've heard all of them. 10 people who stepped into Oregon, into its schools and campgrounds and forests and highways and convenience stores and national parks, and did not step back out. Before this ends, it is worth returning to each of them one more time. Not to summarize, not to resolve, but to let the weight of what hasn't been answered sit where it belongs. Kieran Horman, 7 years old, Portland, Oregon, June 4th, 2010. He walked down a school hallway after a science fair and vanished from a building full of people in the middle of a Friday morning. 16 years have passed. No charges, no body, no resolution. Of the $50,000 reward posted in his name remains unclaimed. His mother tends a garden space in his honor. His father has never stopped asking for answers. Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, or somewhere beyond it, Kyron would be 23 years old today. The Cowden family: Richard, Belinda, David, and Melissa. September 1st, 1974. They went on a last-minute camping trip to a place they knew well. In mountains the family had visited before, close enough to Belinda's mother that they were expected for dinner that evening. They vanished between the general store and their campsite, a short walk. Their bodies were found 7 miles away, 7 months later, hidden in a sealed cave in steep wilderness terrain. The man investigators believe killed them has never been charged. The town where it happened is underwater. The case remains open. Joan Hall, 17 years old, Warrenton, Oregon. September 30th, 1983. A half-mile walk on a public road on a clear September afternoon. She walked out of the mini-mart and into the middle of her hometown and was never seen again. The witness statements that might have pointed toward an answer were changed within days, taken by a deputy who didn't disclose his conflict of interest, and have never been explained. Joni's parents died in 1994, both within months of each other, without knowing what happened to their youngest child. 2 of her siblings have since died as well. Her brother Chuck is still looking for answers. Derek Engebretson, 8 years old, Winema National Forest. December 5th, 1998. He walked ahead of his grandfather on a snowy trail to catch up with his father and was gone within minutes. A snow angel pressed into the clearing near the road, tracks obliterated by a snowplow. A witness who saw a struggle on the highway and didn't stop. A search coordinator who delayed the response for a dinner party. 10,000 hours of searching over 2 years. Nothing found. A convicted predator in the file as a suspect, never charged. The family went bankrupt searching for him. Kimberly Forbes, 48 years old, Hood River, Oregon, October 30th, 2004. She was supposed to meet a friend for breakfast and go shopping in Portland. Her car was found 3 weeks later in a restaurant parking lot in Gresham, 55 miles from her house, with no leads inside and no explanation for how it got there. No bank activity, no phone trace, no body, no suspect. The case was reopened in 2018 and has produced nothing new. She has never been found. Michael Bryson, 27 years old, Hobo Camp Campground, Lane County, August 5th, 2020. He walked off a party bus at 4:30 in the morning into the Umpqua Forest, and the 40 to 60 people who were there with him packed up and left before the search had even properly begun. His clothing turned up 4 months later in a location that had been searched multiple times. His father believes it was planted. Foul play has not been ruled out. The case remains active and static. He has never been found. Samuel Bölke, 8 years old, Crater Lake National Park, August 2006. He ran over a small hill on the North Rim Trail, and his father was behind him within seconds, and Sammy was already gone. The search dogs found no scent. The air horns and whistles couldn't be used because of his autism. The deepest lake in the United States sits below, 1,943 feet, unmapped at its lowest points. He has never been found. Rebecca Reed, 37 years old, Eugene, Oregon, January 27th, 1997. She was taken from her own store at knife point in front of a witness who called 911 in real time. A composite sketch was released. 1,500 leads were tracked in year one. America's Most Wanted ran the case. The FBI was involved. The truck with the horizontal stripe has never been identified. The man with the shoulder-length brown hair has never been found. Becky has never been found. Kelly Disney, 17 years old, Newport, Oregon, March 9, 1984. A deputy drove away from her at 1 a.m. after she told him she was fine and heading to a friend's house. She never arrived. 10 years later, her skull was found in an abandoned car in the woods, placed there deliberately under a carpet. The rest of her body is still out there. The FBI is now involved. A $50,000 reward has been posted. After 16 years of silence, her former boyfriend has finally spoken to investigators. Someone in Newport knows what happened. Edward Chester Nye, 14 years old, Sky Lakes Wilderness, June 22, 1978. He went fishing by himself along the middle fork of the Rogue River and told his brother he would be back. The river kept moving, and the forest kept its silence. After 1 week, authorities suggested he had probably hitchhiked home. He was never seen again. He would be in his early 60s today. 10 people, 10 places, all of them in Oregon, and every single case still open. There is something about Oregon that resists easy explanation when you look at these cases together. Not a theory, not a pattern that connects all 10 in a single thread, but something about the particular geography of this state. The way it holds wilderness right up against suburb. The way a coastal highway can feel like the edge of the world at 1 a.m. The way national park trails sit above lakes too deep to fully search. That seems to create conditions where people can disappear completely, and the answers can stay buried for decades. Consider what these 10 cases have in common, not in terms of cause, but in terms of outcome. In each case, a person stepped away from safety. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by force, sometimes simply by walking in a direction that seemed ordinary, and the world closed around them. In each case, the initial response was either delayed, misdirected, or hampered by something that should not have gotten in the way. A school policy about doctor's appointments. A 24-hour waiting period before searching for missing adults. A search coordinator unwilling to interrupt a dinner party. A police department that filed a teenager's disappearance as a probable runaway. A campground full of people who left before the search had even begun. In each case, the investigation reached a point where the leads ran out. Only the physical evidence either never existed or was contaminated or was hidden too well to recover, and the file moved from active to cold. In each case, somewhere in Oregon, someone is still waiting. The families of these 10 people have not stopped. That is worth saying plainly, because the temptation in cases this old is to treat the passage of time as a form of closure, as though decades of silence mean the question has been answered quietly, without announcement. It has not. Kyron Horman's parents continue to speak publicly about their son. The Cowden case still draws researchers and journalists who believe the circumstantial evidence against the identified suspect is overwhelming, and that justice has been denied for 50 years. Joni Hall's brother Chuck is still alive, still talking to anyone who will listen, and still believing that someone in Warrenton knows what happened on that September afternoon in 1983. The Engebretson family spent years and their savings searching Pelican Butte. Kimberly Forbes's neighbors still remember the Burgundy Explorer and the blank space where an explanation should be. Parrish and Tina Bryson built a foundation in their son's name. Samuel Belka's family has never received a word of resolution from Crater Lake. Becky Reed's sister still counts the years. Angela Dodds drives to the intersection of Highway 20 and Southeast Moore Drive and stands at the place where her sister was last seen alive. Edward Nye's case file has been updated with new age progressions well into the 21st century, as though the possibility of finding him remains real enough to maintain. Because it does remain real. Cases break. Cold cases break all the time, sometimes from technology that didn't exist when the disappearance happened, sometimes from a witness who has been carrying a secret for decades and finally decides the weight of it is too much. Kelly Disney's case has FBI involvement now and a $50,000 reward and a former boyfriend who spent 16 years refusing to talk and then talked. That is a case that moved after 40 years because someone changed their mind about what they were willing to say out loud. Any of these cases could move the same way. Any of them. Here is what the record shows about each of these 10 people. Stripped of everything except what is confirmed and what remains unknown. Kyron Horman was last confirmed seen at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning on June 4th, 2010, near the south entrance of Skyline Elementary School in Portland. What happened between that moment and 3:30 in the afternoon, when his absence was reported, is officially unknown. His current whereabouts are unknown. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance. Richard, Belinda, David, and Melissa Cowden were last confirmed seen on the morning of September 1st, 1974, walking away from the Copper General Store toward their campsite in the Siskiyou Mountains. Their bodies were recovered 7 miles away in April of 1975. How they were transported there and by whom is officially unknown. No one has ever been charged with their murders. Joan Hall was last confirmed seen at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon on September 30th, 1983, at the Warrenton Mini Mart. A possible sighting near a pizzeria shortly afterward has never been confirmed. Her current whereabouts are unknown. No one has ever been charged in connection with her disappearance. Derek Engebretson was last confirmed seen by his grandfather on the afternoon of December 5th, 1998, walking ahead on a trail in the Winema National Forest. A snow angel was found near the road. Tracks were obliterated. A witness reported seeing a struggle on a nearby highway. Derek's current whereabouts are unknown. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance. Kimberly Forbes was last confirmed seen on October 30th, 2004, at her residence in Hood River. Her vehicle was recovered in Gresham on November 19th, 2004, with no leads inside. Her current whereabouts are unknown. No one has been charged in connection with her disappearance. Michael Bryson was last confirmed seen walking away from a party bus at approximately 4:30 in the morning on August 5th, 2020, at Hobo Camp Campground near Dorena. Items of clothing attributed to him were found in December of 2020 in an area previously searched. His current whereabouts are unknown. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance. Samuel Boylke was last confirmed seen by his father running over a small hill near the Cleetwood Cove Trail at Crater Lake National Park in August of 2006. Search dogs could not pick up his scent. His current whereabouts are unknown. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance. Rebecca Reed was last confirmed seen at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning on January 27th, 1997, being forced into a pickup truck outside the grocery cart store on Highway 99 North in Eugene. A suspect composite was released. The vehicle was described in specific detail. Neither the suspect nor the vehicle has ever been identified. Becky's current whereabouts are unknown. No one has been charged in connection with her abduction. Kelly Disney was last confirmed seen alive at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning on March 9th, 1984, walking east on Highway 20 near Southeast Moore Drive in Newport. Her skull was recovered in July of 1994 from an abandoned vehicle near Big Creek Reservoir. The rest of her remains have never been found. Her death was ruled a homicide. No one has ever been charged with her murder. Edward Chester Nye was last confirmed seen on the afternoon of June 22, 1978, walking toward the middle fork of the Rogue River from a church youth group campsite in the Sky Lakes wilderness. No physical evidence of his fate has ever been recovered. His current whereabouts are unknown. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance. 10 cases, 10 sets of facts that end in the same place. An open file, an unanswered question, a family that has been waiting longer than should be asked of any human being. There are people alive right now who know things about some of these cases. Not theories, not guesses. Knowledge. The person who took Becky Reed from that parking lot either told someone or left evidence that hasn't been found yet. The people who left Hobo Camp Campground the morning Michael Bryson disappeared know more than has ever been made public. Someone in Newport, Oregon, has carried 40 years of knowledge about what happened to Kelly Disney after that deputy's taillights disappeared down Highway 20. Joni Hall's family has believed for 4 decades that their small town holds the answer and simply hasn't spoken it yet. The mountain holds its silence. The river keeps moving. The lake stays deep and blue and gives nothing back. But silence is not permanent. Not always. Sometimes it breaks at the most unexpected moment. A phone call, a deathbed confession, a piece of technology that reads what the human eye missed the first time, and a person who wakes up one morning and decides that what they've been carrying is too heavy to carry any further. Any one of these cases could break tomorrow. Any one of them. And somewhere in Oregon, in the West Hills above Portland, in the Siskiyou Mountains of the South, on the coast near the mouth of the Columbia, on the slopes above Klamath Lake, in the Columbia River Gorge, in the Umpqua Forest, at the rim of Crater Lake, along the Highway 99 corridor in Eugene, on the gravel roads above Newport, in the Sky Lakes wilderness. The answers are still there, waiting, patient the way only the wilderness and the truth can be patient, waiting for someone to say what they know. There is a particular kind of grief that belongs to the families of the missing. It is different from the grief of loss, though it contains loss inside it. And it is the grief of not knowing, of waking up every morning in a world where the question is still open, where the answer exists somewhere but has not yet found its way to you. It does not follow the stages that grief is supposed to follow. It does not move through denial and anger and acceptance towards something resembling peace. It stays. It sits in the same chair every morning and asks the same question and receives the same silence in return. Desiree Young, Kyron Horman's mother, said it plainly in a recent interview. It doesn't get easier. I think people think that it does, but it really doesn't. She has a space in her backyard she calls Kyron's pad, filled with frog decorations, because Kyron loved red-eyed tree frogs and built his science fair project around them and wore his CSI shirt to school on the morning of June 4th, 2010, and was 7 years old and has not been seen since. She said, "Kyron still exists. He's still part of our family." 16 years later, that statement is not a sentiment. It is a fact. He is still part of their family. He is simply not there. Caney Horman, Kyron's father, described going to the bus stop that afternoon in June of 2010. Watching the bus pull up, watching the other children come off, watching the driver's expression shift into confusion. He said, "The bus driver looked a little confused and let us know he wasn't on the bus that day." That's when the ensuing panic kind of kicks in. That panic has not stopped. It has simply become the texture of daily life, the background radiation of a family that lost a 7-year-old on a Friday morning and has never been allowed to understand why. in the Siskiyou Mountains, or more precisely above what used to be the town of Copper and is now the floor of Applegate Lake. The Cowden family has been waiting for 50 years for someone to be held accountable. Richard was 28. Belinda was 22. David was 5. Melissa was 5 months old. They went on a camping trip they hadn't planned to a place they knew well on a weekend when everything was supposed to be ordinary. The man investigators believe is responsible for what happened to them has been identified, has been paroled, has committed further violent acts, and has never been charged with their murders. The case remains open. The lake covers the campground where it started. The answers are in the hills above that water and in the memory of a man who has never been made to speak them in a courtroom. In Warrenton, on the Oregon coast, Joni Hall's brother Chuck is the last of the original family who was there in 1983 and is still waiting. His parents are gone. 2 of his siblings are gone. He says, somebody knows something. It's a small community. Somebody knows something. He is right. The community is small enough that the geography of that September afternoon, the mini-mart, the half-mile of Main Street, the elementary school where her aunt was waiting, is a geography that has been walked by the same families for generations. The answer to what happened to Joni Hall is inside that community. It has been inside that community for 41 years. Robert Engebretson drove from his graveyard shift to Pelican Butte every weekend for 2 years after his 8-year-old son disappeared on a December afternoon in 1998. And he and his wife Lori kept a map on which they marked every area they had searched. They went bankrupt. They never found anything. Their son left a snow angel in a clearing near the road, and a snowplow came through, and after that, there was nothing to follow. Somewhere, in the Winema National Forest, or in a direction no one has thought to look yet, or in the knowledge of a man who asked for directions in that forest on a December afternoon and has never been identified, Derek is still waiting to be found. Kimberly Forbes's neighbors in Hood River still remember her. Margaret Strasser, who lived near Kimberly on Jeanette Road, said, "You want to have closure of some kind. The way it is now, it's always this thing in the back of your mind." Kimberly was a bank teller who was punctual and reliable and preferred to visit Portland with a friend rather than alone. On the one Saturday when she made an exception to that preference, her car ended up abandoned 55 miles from her house in a suburban parking lot, and she was never seen again. The Columbia River Gorge corridor between Hood River and Portland is one of the most traveled stretches of highway in Oregon. Whatever happened to Kimberly Forbes happened along that route or at the end of it, and has been kept quiet ever since. Parrish and Tina Bryson stayed at Hobo Camp Campground for 19 days in August of 2020. They slept there in the forest outside Dorena, following every tip that came in, waiting for their son to somehow come back out of the trees. He was 27 years old and had just told them he was thinking about becoming an electrician and had performed a DJ set at a birthday party and walked off a bus at 4:30 in the morning and has not been heard from since. The people who were at that campground with him know more than has ever been made public. That is not speculation. That is the conclusion of a family, a detective, and a county sheriff's office that has not ruled out foul play. Samuel Belka's father was steps behind his son when Sammy ran over that hill at Crater Lake in August of 2006. Steps. The gap between them was measured in seconds. And in those seconds, in a national park in the middle of the tourist season, an 8-year-old boy with mild autism disappeared into terrain that has never given him back. The lake below the rim is 1,943 feet deep. It has been there for 7,000 years, long before any of this, and it will be there long after. It does not keep time the way families do. It simply holds what falls into it. Dear old Reed worked and raised his son after Becky was taken in 1997. That son was 13 years old when his mother was forced into a truck at knife point in front of a witness in Eugene. And he is in his 40s now. And he said as a boy that he missed his mother's voice. That sentence, the specific detail of a child's voice and what it misses, carries more weight than any summary of a cold case file. Becky was bubbly and outgoing and devoted, and she was taken from her own store at 1 a.m. on Super Bowl Sunday by a man with a knife and a light-colored truck with a horizontal stripe. And that man has never been identified. And Becky has never come home. Angela Dodds drives to Newport sometimes, to the intersection of Highway 20 and Southeast Moore Drive, and stands where her sister stood at 1 o'clock in the morning on March 9th, 1984. Kelly was 17. Angela was 13. Kelly worked at a pizza parlor and lived with her boyfriend, and told a sheriff's deputy she was heading to a friend's house and was fine. Someone in Newport knew what happened in the 15 to 20 minutes after that deputy drove away. Someone is known for 41 years. The skull that turned up in an abandoned car in 1994, placed there deliberately under a carpet, was put there by someone who had been thinking about Kelly Disney for a decade after she disappeared. That person is either still alive, or they told someone before they died. The $50,000 reward and the FBI and 16 years of volunteer investigation are all reaching toward that person, whoever they are. And Edward Chester Nye's brother watched him walk toward the river in the summer of 1978 and said he would be back. That brother has been waiting for 46 years. The authorities said after 1 week that Edward had probably hitchhiked home. He was 14 years old, 12 miles from the nearest town, in federally designated wilderness with no roads in. And they said he had probably hitchhiked home. He did not hitchhike home. He walked toward the sound of the Rogue River on a summer afternoon with a small hatchet and brown jeans and a yellow shirt and fishing plans, and the forest took him, and he has not been seen since. 10 cases, 10 families, 10 open questions that have outlasted marriages and careers, and in some instances, the lives of the people who were asking them. This is not ancient history. Kyron Horman disappeared in 2010. Michael Bryson disappeared in 2020. Kelly Disney's case has active FBI involvement right now in 2025, with a reward posted and investigators who believe they are close. These are not sealed archives. They are living investigations, carried by living people, pointed at answers that are somewhere in Oregon, waiting to be reached. The map is still open. Oregon looks the same as it always has. The Pacific Crest Trail still winds through old-growth forest, so dense the light disappears before noon. Crater Lake still sits in its caldera, 1,943 feet deep, so blue it looks like something that was placed there rather than formed. The coastal highway still stretches for miles without another car in sight, the ocean invisible beyond the tree line, but always audible, always present. The Rogue River still moves through the Sky Lake's wilderness, the way it has moved for thousands of years, cold and fast and indifferent to the questions that have been asked along its banks. The school on the ridge above Portland is still there. Children still attend Skyline Elementary. Science fairs still happen in the spring. Parents still come in the morning and take photographs of their children standing next to their projects. And the hallways still smell like glue sticks and construction paper. And the buses still come in the afternoon to take everyone home. And somewhere in the background of all of that ordinary life, the case of a 7-year-old boy who wore a CSI t-shirt on a Friday morning in June is still open, still active, still waiting for the one piece of information that has never arrived. The campground at Carberry Creek is gone. You cannot stand where the Cowden family stood on the morning of September 1st, 1974, because Applegate Lake covers it now. The general store is gone. The short walk between them, the last confirmed path of a father and his 5-year-old son, is underwater. But the hills above the lake are still there, and the cave where the bodies were found is still there. And the case that was built around a man who has never been charged is still there, unsettled and unresolved. 50 years after a family went on a camping trip they hadn't planned and never came home from. Main Street in Warrenton still runs through the middle of a small coastal town. The mini-mart where Joni Hall was last seen has changed hands and names over the decades, the way small-town storefronts do. But the geography has not changed. The half-mile between that corner and Warrenton Grade School is the same half-mile it was on September 30th, 1983. The distance is walkable in 10 minutes. A girl walked out of a store and into the middle of that distance and did not come out the other side. And the town that watched it happen has been carrying that knowledge, in whatever form it exists, in whatever minds still hold it, for 41 years. Pelican Butte still rises above Upper Klamath Lake in southern Oregon. The slopes where Derek Engebretson disappeared are still accessible, still forested, still the kind of terrain where a family might go to find a Christmas tree on a December afternoon. The clearing near the road, where searchers found the snow angel and the obliterated tracks, is still there. The forest that absorbed an 8-year-old boy who grew up in these mountains, who knew this terrain, who had a hatchet in his hand and a snowsuit on his back. That forest has said nothing in 26 years. It continues to say nothing. Highway 99 North in Eugene still runs north through the Willamette Valley. The building at 1510 that was the grocery cart convenience store in 1997 is now a Dari Mart. Different name, different signage, different customers coming and going at 1 in the morning for different reasons. But it is the same building, on the same street, on the same corridor where a woman was forced into a truck by a man with a knife, while a witness stood close enough to describe what he was wearing. The truck with the horizontal stripe has never come back. The man has never been identified. And somewhere, either alive or in a grave, is the person who drove away from that parking lot with Becky Reed, and who has spent almost 30 years living with what he did. Jeanette Road in Hood River is still a residential street above the Columbia River, with views of the gorge and Mount Hood visible on clear days. And the house where Kimberly Forbes was last seen still stands. The Don Pedro's restaurant parking lot in Gresham, 55 miles away, where her Explorer was found with cold answers inside it, is still a commercial lot on Southeast Stark Street. The distance between those 2 points has never been explained. It has simply remained a distance that cannot be accounted for, a gap in the record where a woman used to be. Bryce Creek Road still runs through the Umpqua National Forest, past Hobo Camp Campground, past the spot where Michael Bryson's clothing was found 4 months after he disappeared. The creek is still there. The trees are still there. The campground still hosts parties in the summer, still draws people into that stretch of remote Lane County forest for music and fire and the particular freedom of a place with no cell service. The last confirmed location of Michael Bryson, a party bus in a primitive campground at 4:30 in the morning, is still a place you can drive to. The forest beyond the road's edge is still the forest that took him. Crater Lake is still there. It is one of the most visited national parks in Oregon. And every summer, hundreds of thousands of people stand at the rim and look down at the blue water below and feel something that is difficult to name. Awe, maybe, or the particular unease that comes from looking at something too deep to fully comprehend. The Cleetwood Cove Trail still descends to the water's surface. The hill near the trailhead, the one Sammy Boelka ran over in August of 2006 while his father was steps behind him, is still there. The lake has not given him back. It has not given anything back. It simply holds its depth and its color and its silence, and continues to be exactly what it has always been. Highway 20 still runs east out of Newport, past the intersection at Highway 101, past Southeast Moore Drive, where a sheriff's deputy spoke to a 17-year-old girl at 1 in the morning in 1984 and then drove away. The gravel roads above Newport still branch off into the hills where Big Creek Reservoir sits in the trees. The abandoned car that held Kelly Disney's skull is gone. The carpet remnant is gone. The skull is in an evidence room somewhere, the only piece of Kelly that has ever been recovered, waiting for the rest of her story to be told. The woods are still the woods. The answer is still in there somewhere. The FBI is still looking. Someone in Newport is still deciding whether to speak. The middle fork of the Rogue River still moves through the Sky Lakes wilderness 12 miles east of Prospect. The water is still cold. The current is still fast. The old-growth forest still presses in on both sides of the canyon. The campsite where Edward Chester Nye's church youth group gathered on the evening of June 22, 1978, and where his brother stood and watched him walk toward the sound of the water, is still accessible by trail. The river has moved continuously for 46 years since a 14-year-old boy in a yellow shirt walked toward it with a hatchet and a plan to go fishing and did not come back. It does not hold still for questions. It does not wait. It just moves. These are the 10 places. These are the 10 gaps in the record where people used to be. A school hallway, a campsite in mountains that are now underwater, a half-mile of Main Street, a clearing in a snowy forest, a parking lot in the Columbia River Gorge, a campground rave in the Umpqua, a national park trail above the deepest lake in America, a convenience store on Highway 99, a coastal highway at 1 in the morning, a river in the wilderness. 10 people walked into Oregon, into its ordinary places and its extraordinary ones, into its cities and its forests and its parks and its highways, and did not walk back out. Kyron Horman, the Cowden family, Joni Hall, Derek Engebretson, Kimberly Forbes, Michael Bryson, Sammy Bolke, Becky Reed, Kelly Disney, Edward Chester Nye. Their cases are open. Their families are still waiting. The people who know what happened to some of them are still out there, living in the same towns, on driving the same roads, carrying the same knowledge they have carried for years or decades, waiting for whatever it is that finally makes a person decide to speak. The map is still open. The roots are still there. And somewhere in Oregon, in the forest, in the mountains, along the highway, at the bottom of the deepest lake in the country, the answers are still waiting to be found.